And welcome everybody. My name is Claire and I look after the young reporters for the Environment Ireland, and I'm very excited to listen for 2024 and kickstart our first skills-based webinar on article writing with Dave Robbins, who is the Director of DCU Centre for Climate and Society and Associate Professor at School of Communications. His research interests are centred around media representations of climate change, with wide experience as a reporter, editor, columnist, broadcaster, and feature writing. So I'm very excited today to be joined by him, and we get some insights from him today. But before we get started, just a quick note on some housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded and later available on our YouTube channel for the duration of the competition. And please do post any comments or questions into the chat as we go. And my colleague Rob and Deirdre, who are here, will go through them at the end, where we will have time for Q&A. So just a quick overview then. I just want to welcome all our new participants onto the programme and give you a brief introduction to it, the background, history, both in Ireland and internationally, and move on then to the 4-step methodology that's used to create entries. And then we'll move on to the timeline for the year ahead and detailing the resources and tools that are available to you all. So the essence of the YRE programme is to encourage students to investigate a specific environmental issue in their community, propose solutions, and then articulate findings through the media of writing, photography, or video. The programme develops skills and knowledge about environmental issues around us, but it also enhances our communication skills, citizenship skills, individual initiative, teamwork, critical analysis, social responsibility, and leadership abilities. It's run by FEE, with a Foundation of Environmental Education in Copenhagen, and some of you will be familiar with FEE as it's the parent body for Green Campus, Green Schools, and the Blue Flag programme. It operates in both second level and in third level, and it is a great showcase for step 6 under informing and involving and linking in with your local community. So it provides a methodology and platform to communicate solutions to environmental issues through article, photo reports, and videography. And previous winners have featured on RTÉ News and the Irish Times on the News Today as well. A little bit about the history and the background. We are celebrating 30 years of YRE internationally this year. So there's 42 countries that are involved and 495,393 young reporters collectively. We had recent reporters actually a report from COP28 as well. It's relatively new though in Ireland. For around the 20th anniversary of the programme, YRE really diversified with different age categories, videos, new websites, and online channels as well. So the team expanded and diversified into climate action, loss of biodiversity, pollution, and other categories. And this other category really allows you to broaden your scope as journalists and supports the 17 global goals in a very multifaceted way. So reporting can take on any issue from travel, air quality, energy use, litter and waste to biodiversity. And the judges of the competition will be keen to see entries that identify and offer solutions in these areas. So the YRE process then is underpinned by a simple and tested 4-step methodology: investigating, researching your solution, reporting, and then disseminating. So identifying an issue in your locality, it could be on school or a college campus, at home, or even at a city, regional, or national level. And as I said, the scope is very broad, and it can be through desktop analysis, data collection, quantitative and qualitative in the form of interviews. So this is essentially your hypothesis testing stage. And then the purpose of highlighting these 2 initial steps here today is just to focus on the importance of critical analysis as journalists then, and coming up with that originality and creativity during your investigation and researching solutions. And then the third steps involves creating your article, your video or photograph, and the communicating these ideas, and then how you're going to disseminate this. So this is also a really important aspect. It can take form of newsletters or bulletins, social media and forums, local media, even RT as well. And it's part of the judging process as well. So sometimes tracking metrics here will count for marks in the competition, and we'll ask where the source of these informations is. And we'll talk a little bit about that later too. And then we'll also do our bit as well to promote entries via our own Facebook and Instagram channels, as well as our own exposure page, which is designed specifically to highlight journalistic content. So some tools and resources then that are available. We did send on the YRE handbook. This is a very detailed 42-page document to help you go through that 4-step process and coming up with your ideas and tutorials as well. There's information on the judging criteria and video tutorials on videography and photography and article writing as well. And then there's a whole toolkit of resources on our website, but also on the international website as well. There's also a great document on the connection between YRE and the Sustainable Development Goals for those of you who are interested. And then our Irish website has more detailed information on the competition itself and our own entry criteria and guidelines. We'll pop in some of the links to these sites as well, in particular our exposure site where you can view past entries. So this is a tool that acts to quickly and easily turn content into shareable professional pieces for online audiences. And you can have a look through all the different categories on articles, on photographs, and on the videographies that have been submitted, both at on Irish level and internationally as well. And then we have a series of our webinars that are available on our YouTube page too. And again, we will be posting today, so you can have a look at previous entries as well. And then also finally, there's like the FEE Academy, which I can send you on links to as well. There is a course that's available for free called Storytelling for Climate Action. It takes about 2 to 3 hours that you can complete in your own time. And there's 3 different courses that are available there. One on article writing, the second one on videography, and the third one on photo skills too. So I highly recommend them as well. And just to run through then the timeline for the rest of the year. So the next webinar is planned next month in March. I'll send you on details by email, but it is on photography skills with a focus on utilizing our smartphones that we all can use to take great photos. The idea is we want to make it accessible for everyone, so we don't need to have the latest high-tech DSLR equipment. And then we'll be following this up in April with a workshop on videography as well. And there'll be all lunchtime-based webinars that are recorded. Then some information then on the competition itself. So the accumulation of the programme then is the national competition, which takes place every year in May. And altogether, the prize fund is €1,500. So it's a great incentive to get involved. In the past, we've given away tablets, GoPros, and even cash prizes for winners and for runners-up as well. You can enter as an individual or a group, and it's the most common question I do get asked. There are no limits, but do remember, as a group, the prize will be split if there are winners or runners-up available. The judges do look for evidence of critical thinking and originality in entries. And then remember, points are also awarded for the evidence of dissemination. So it's really important to include this with your entries. So where you have published your articles and media forms. And then for the national competition guidelines, terms and conditions, the best place to look is at the YREireland.org, where you can see the criteria in more detail, and do feel free to contact me if you have any queries on this. This is the link to our online exposure channel. So we've had a wide range of topics in previous years, and we've also had some international winners as well. And you can see here some of our winners published in the Irish Times. You can have a look at this link. And then some of the international overall winner last year. Like, picture really does paint 1,000 words here. You can see this this kind of time capsule picture that was a student's journey in Mexico, and really seeing the impact of drought and climate change in her locality over the years, and proposed solutions here. And then this is really eye-capturing one as well, one of the international winners on the single photo campaign. So remember, with your photos, it can also be a story, but it can also be a report campaign as well. I will leave here the links as well for registering if you haven't fully registered for the programme for second level or for third level. And this is available on the YRE Ireland website as well. And I will leave with you my direct email and contacts, and do connect with us on our social media channels and share with your networks as well, because we want to get as many people involved this year as possible. And I'll make these slides available to everyone after this webinar as well. So without further ado, I want to hand you over to Dave Robbins now, and we'll get started on some tips for writing. Thank you.
Sorry, Dave, you're mute again.
Sorry, folks. Yeah, I'm constantly on mute. My wife wishes I was more on mute than I am. Anyway, I'm just going to share my screen with you, and I'll get cracking on my presentation about how to go about reporting on environmental topics. So hopefully you're seeing my slides there. As Claire said, I worked for a long time in different newsrooms around the media scene. So I've seen a good experience in both writing articles about the environment and commissioning them from an editor's point of view. So hopefully you'll find what I have to say useful and very practical. The first thing I would suggest if you are going to start covering environmental issues is to just check your own environmental literacy. So these are recommendations about what every journalist should know about the environment, even if they're not kind of environmental correspondence, just that you have a basic understanding of climate science. You kind of have try and get a handle on where you can find reliable sources of information for your articles. Have a rough idea of what, the difference between, the Paris Agreement is committing us to aim to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. That's a 1.5 degree increase on pre-industrial levels, and what the difference for the different levels of emissions would be, to try and understand, carbon budgets and the regulatory environment around the environment, and know how much of our carbon budget is left. I know that might seem like a lot to take in, but just to try and immerse yourself in the regulatory environment in which a lot of these topics and debates are taking place. So step one, just try and inform yourself and just check in about your own kind of climate literacy, that you understand of a basic understanding of the science and a basic understanding of where Ireland is in its response to climate change. So some of you may be wondering, well, how can I come up with ideas for climate change articles? So here are a couple of techniques that I've found really useful to generate ideas. So the first one is extrapolation. So think of maybe something small that's happening in your area, and maybe speculate about what would happen if this were scaled up. What would happen if, say, there's a community garden or some sort of biodiversity measure or something your Tidy Towns committee is doing. What would happen if this were, operationalized at scale? What would that look like? And could that be impactful? The opposite of that is to take something big and localize it. So one of the things that's going on at the moment is a big debate about whether Dublin Airport should be allowed to expand and take in more flights. So is there a local angle to that? What would that mean for people living in the environment? What would it mean for the people who live on the flight path of these new routes or whatever? So you can kind of take a big development in climate change and try and apply it very locally. Another technique is called synthesis, which is where you kind of notice a lot of small things happening, and you kind of draw them all together to illustrate a kind of larger movement towards something. One thing that strikes me about this is maybe something like the trend towards going back to some analog technology, and dumb phones and turntable record players. Could you draw all those things together to make a trend back towards less intrusive technology? A really good one to think about is viewpoint switching. So in the different kind of debates about climate action that are taking place in Ireland, we have different targets in the different sectors like transport, energy, and agriculture. Are there people we haven't heard from in these? I was thinking about the debate about water quality and how our water quality is being affected by intensive agriculture. And I was thinking I hadn't really heard much from the angling community, the fishermen who fish in these rivers and lakes. Maybe there's a voice that has been missing from something that's happening in your area. And the fifth technique is called projection, where you just kind of you take as your starting point a question like, what if something stopped? Let's say we stopped with our plans to build a metro to the airport. What would happen? What would that mean? What if something that's happening at the moment continues? What would be the impact of that? Let's say we continued with our present agriculture system or our present transport system. Or what if something gets bigger or worse or better? So these are all questions that can generate ideas for articles or videos or whatever format you choose to go to use to make your submission. I'm just giving you kind of frameworks, I suppose, to think about what the elements of an article are, what information you need to gather. So usually an article has a central development, something that's the main focus of the article. And it's usually something new, because journalism is really about new information. So something is happening, okay, whatever it might be that you're focused on. And then you start to think about, well, what's the impact of what's happening? What does it mean? What implications does it have? The future. So what will happen down the line if this, as a result of this central event? And counter moves is the idea of like, who is acting against this development? So journalism often focuses on conflict. It's one of the big criticisms of journalism, that it kind of it does almost go out of its way to create or to report on conflict. But it's something to think about. Let's say somebody wants to devote an area to biodiversity in your local where you live. Okay, what would be the impact of that biodiversity wise on the change of use of the piece of land? What would happen in the future with that? And who is opposed to it? Like who's against it and why? So these are kind of just things to elements of a story that should be covered. I teach journalism out here in DCU, so I'm constantly. You might be surprised at number one, their observation. I'm constantly trying to get my students to get away from their computer screens and their phones and actually go somewhere and see something for themselves. So observation is a really key technique in journalism, and I've found through grading work over the years that if students actually go somewhere and see something for themselves, it really lifts the writing, the article in general. It lends it a kind of vividness and a freshness that isn't there if it's all just done by desk research and Google searches and using paper sources. So if you go somewhere that you can describe what you saw, it's a really, really super addition to your article. Listening as well. If, let's say you're going to, sorry, I'm not being very creative with my examples, but let's say you go to the allotments in your local area and you just observe what's happening and you listen to the conversations that are going on around you. That is great material. That's, you haven't really done anything. You're just observing and listening to what's going on around you. Then it gets a little bit more proactive from your part because you start to interview people. But that observation and listening really gives you the basis for the type of questions you will ask, So I think first of all, we need to observe and listen before starting to kind of put ourselves to start to shape the story. So interviewing, I'll talk about different types of sources you can have or should have in your articles a little bit later on, but you start to interview people. Now, interviewing can be done face-to-face, of course, and it can be done over the phone or, over conferencing software. What I would say is that your generation regards it as extremely rude to phone somebody directly. It's sort of seen as a major breach of etiquette to actually, call somebody. And I would really urge you to kind of try and get over that, because and I've seen students in my time, they would do anything rather than phone someone. They will connect with them on LinkedIn. They will try and DM them on different social media platforms. They'll email them, and that's great. I mean, you can certainly try that, but it's not as good as picking up the phone and calling them directly. A couple of reasons. One, it's a lot quicker. Two is that if somebody responds to an email query, what they will say in an email is much more formal and official than if you got them at the end of a phone. And if you get them at the end of the phone, they're talking in their own voice and they give quotes that are just much more natural and much more interesting than if they are composing something written. So I really would urge you to try and speak to people directly, whether that's face-to-face or on the phone. And the last thing is the sort of desk research that you do to get the context and data and other information that's relevant to the topic that you're focusing on. So I would think about trying to bring all four of those techniques into what you're going to do. When it comes to writing an article, a lot of us who teach journalism on different journalism programs talk about this spine of an article, okay, which is the first paragraph, the nut graph. The nut graph is usually about paragraph 3 or 4, and it's the paragraph that explains why this topic is of interest right now. Now, I've got an example later on I'm going to go through the structure of a feature and show you how it works out in practice. But basically, there has to be a paragraph that explains why you're writing about biodiversity, or why you're writing about community gardens or allotments or transport or bike lanes or whatever it is you're writing about, why that's relevant now. And of course, it's the context of the climate and biodiversity emergencies, and it's the context of us trying to bring in policies that tackle those. And then the payoff is the last paragraph. So that's the final paragraph. And often it'll loop back to something you mentioned in your intro. So let's say you've got an article that is going to go back to my allotments. It's writing about the allotment movement and maybe a set of allotments that are in your local area. And maybe you go up there and you see something that is really, you can describe somebody digging their allotment or somebody harvesting to bring stuff home for to cook for their meal. So you often loop back to that scene in your final paragraph, so that there's a structure there. It kind of rounds off the article nicely. What I tell my students to try and avoid is that your article sort of just dribbles to a halt. That it's actually crafted and some thought has gone into how the ending works and fits in with the rest of the article. So I was talking about, interviewing people and talking to them to get some quotes for your article. So what we call these sources, right? So I'd like you to think about 3 different levels of sources that you could have in your article. So one is those who are involved on the ground. And I'm sticking with the allotments here. So those are the people who have an allotment, who are working up in their allotment and who are actually involved in this movement, I suppose, on the ground. The second level of sources is kind of it's somebody who can put numbers or a bit of context on the topic. So say somebody in the county council or somebody in some organization that can say, yes, there's a big movement towards growing your own food, or, stand back a little bit and put it in a wider context. And then there's a third level, which is kind of even above that again, somebody who can speak to this in an even wider context about it's about people reconnecting with nature, or it's about people gaining control over some measure of their own lives, or it's about people who are confronted by climate change and biodiversity loss. And this is some way they can experience a bit of agency themselves and deal with eco-anxiety by growing their own food. So think of them as, sometimes you can think of them as if I can use a war metaphor, level 1 sources are the soldiers who are fighting in the war. Level 2 are the generals who set the strategy for the war, and level 3 are the politicians who started the war in the first place. So so think of those 3 levels, if you can get them into your reporting. These are other elements to bring into your writing. The scenes I mentioned, the quotes I mentioned, the facts are the result of your desk research. I want to talk a little bit about something William Blundell, who's the author of a book that I rely on quite a lot, called The Art and Craft of Feature Writing, and he wrote for the New York Times. He speaks about things called gold coins. So the example that I use is a piece of writing about a mafia mob boss being put on trial in New York. A guy called Tony Provenzano is brought into the courtroom in a very high security environment in this courthouse in New York. And a journalist called Jimmy Breslin, who was writing for the New York Post at the time, is there to cover it. And he notices that Tony Provenzano has a huge diamond pinky ring on his little finger, and that the light from the window in the courthouse is glinting off this ring. And that's a gold coin. It's a little image, a little motif, something striking that you can describe in your writing. It's almost kind of, it can be a kind of almost poetic image, but something that really brings your writing alive and gives the reader something that they can imagine very, very vividly. So just look out for and be alert for these moments when something, something like that can happen, that you can add into your descriptive writing. In general, in terms of like getting people engaged with your journalism, I would counsel against trying to pick big abstract topics like, I don't know, carbon markets or green investments or something that's very abstract. And we've found that what resonates with audiences is something very grounded in a particular place. So something that's, specific to a locality, and that isn't very abstract, really engages readers. Likewise, instead of dealing with concepts like, say, climate justice or just transitions or different intersectional aspects of climate change, those topics can be brought through people, through telling people's stories. So is there a person that you can focus on that almost embodies and personifies some of these issues that we're dealing with? So keep it local and try and focus on people rather than bigger, more abstract concepts. There's also a kind of turn more recently towards, instead of focusing on problems all the time, to focus on solutions. So to think about writing your article or making your video about somebody who is putting forward a solution, or who is actually kind of carrying out a solution, rather than just focusing on problems, which there are many of. But there's more of a turn towards, yes, we take the problem for granted, but we don't just endlessly describe the problem and how intractable it is. We try and focus on what's the solution. So the people who are against different forms of climate action, this solutions journalism approach would put them under pressure more to suggest solutions themselves. And I'm coming back to the eyewitness idea of really think about, what can I go and see for myself or do for myself? Can I write a first person piece about something I've done myself? It might be a course, it might be getting involved in something that you're carrying out some activity yourself. I'm going to just talk a little bit about different ways into the article. Okay, so the first paragraph is really, really important. It's where you will grab the reader and try and hold their attention. So I'm taking an example of a story about the Rhine River in Germany, which is drying up, and it's a very important kind of piece of transport infrastructure, I suppose, in Germany, because a lot of cargo is moved up and down the Rhine on barges. And because of increased drought due to climate change, the water levels are dropping, and it's becoming less effective as a kind of transport, like a kind of motorway, if you like, in Germany. So a hard news type intro would be very simple, with a news point and an attribution and a time element. So just bear with me as I go through these different aspects. So the news point here is, the drought is affecting freight traffic on the Rhine. The attribution is who's saying this, and it's one of the most experienced skippers who works on these freight ships on the Rhine. And then the time element is yesterday. Okay, so news element, attribution, time. That's kind of a hard news intro. The second type, and this is the one I would really recommend you go for, is that you describe the scene that you saw yourself. His hand works the tiller, steering the boat into the middle of the river towards the fastest flowing water. Skipper Hans Spitzen has been working boats on the Rhine for 30 years, but he's never seen anything like this. We'll be lucky not to run aground, he said. So here you don't explain anything about the context of climate change, or you give really no detail. You just are, it's called starting in the middle. Okay, so you bring the reader right in to the center of the action and plunge them straight into what's going on. And then you kind of backfill the detail about climate change and about drought and about the river, the level of water in the river declining. So the third type is like, it's not as straightforward as the hard news, but it kind of brings together all the elements: the drought, the river traffic, climate change, and the effect on the Rhine as a kind of freight highway in Germany. Okay, so 3 different types of first paragraph to this story. And the one that I find most kind of engaging is number 2, the anecdotal lead, where you tell a little story. You know, you paint a little picture of a scene that you saw for yourself. And of course, you know, the reader then wants to find out more and wants to kind of listen to this person more and wants to find out a little bit about what's going on. The other 2, in a way, there isn't much incentive for the reader to read past the first paragraph. You know, you get a lot of the information in the first paragraph there. So definitely I would think about an anecdotal type of beginning to your article. So this is the article I was talking about. It appeared in the New York Times. And here we see, so I'm just moving some stuff on my screen here. Here we see an anecdotal type of lead about just after sunrise. This captain turned to his ship's radio at the first news of the day to get the water level. The nut graph, as I was describing earlier, is the paragraph that puts the story in context about why am I reading about water levels in the Rhine at the moment? What's relevant? Why is it newsworthy right now? And it's about the longest dry spell, forcing freighters to reduce their cargo or stop sailing on the river altogether. So if we move on to further down the article, we can see the different source levels that I was talking about earlier. Type 1 source, which is somebody caught up in the action, which is the captain of the freighter himself. The type 2 source, who's somebody who can put sort of facts and figures about the extent of things and the cost of things and so on. So this type 2 source is from the Potsdam Institute, talks about the decrease in river freight in general. And type 3 source puts it in a wider context of the hydrology of Germany as a whole. So it's a well-sourced article, and it's well-structured, and it opens with a kind of scene of the captain turning on the radio to find out about the water levels first thing in the morning. And then later on, it comes back to him and his particular experience. So it's important to, I think about the structure of your article. You'll find out loads of interesting things and facts and different elements, and how you put them together is very important for your article. Sometimes we talk a little bit about what we call PhD complex, so that you do so much research and you immerse yourself so much in the topic that when it comes to writing it, you actually don't know how to start or how to find a way in. And I think some of these techniques are kind of useful for, you know, putting a structure on all the things that you found out. So just some stuff about where to find good information about climate change in Ireland. For your general climate literacy, I'd recommend the IPCC assessment reports. Last week we just published, the EPA published Ireland's climate change assessment, which is a similar report for Ireland. The EPA website itself has lots of good data about climate change. The European Environment Agency has lots of good information about that's the sort of the EPA for Europe, and it has lots of good climate change resources. Some other ones, I really love Ethical Consumer magazine. It's really good for stuff around fast fashion and the ethics of different corporations. So it rates how ethical different companies are in terms of, you know, their own carbon footprint, but how diverse their employees are and their board is, and where they invest their money and so on. Carbon Brief is also a really good source of information about climate change. Yale Climate Communications is something a little bit similar to the Young Reporters for the Environment. It's a Creative Commons sort of news agency about climate change stories. And Catherine Hayhoe is a climate scientist who gives really, really accessible TED Talk style webinars about climate change, climate science. So there's some, I won't, these are some people that you might like to talk to if you are writing about the transport sector or the energy sector or climate policy and so on. These would be like the type 3 sources, like the academic sources who can put things in a much wider context. I think it's important, no matter what your story is about, you know, it mightn't ostensibly be about the environment or about sustainability or about biodiversity loss, but in a way, you know, nearly everything has a sustainability element to it, you know, because we've got to ask ourselves about all the stuff we're doing, how sustainable is it? And think of ourselves as kind of involved in a society that is either going to continue business as usual or is going to take a more sustainable path. One of the things I think that journalists and environmental journalism could bring out much more is the cost of inaction. So we often focus on the cost of climate action as if it's going to be a sacrifice or a kind of to penalize us in some way. And we don't often bring in the cost to us of what happens if we don't actually take any climate action. You know, what are the implications of all the bad stuff that's going to happen if we allow climate change to go above 1.5 or 2 degrees? I think we should always kind of try and bring in some element about the carbon cost or the carbon benefit of doing certain things. So you'll often hear a critique about the media, especially say about, you know, build stories that are about building new infrastructure, building a new road or a new runway at the airport. We talk about the cost of actually constructing it, but we don't often talk about the environmental cost of all the emissions that it locks in, because once you build that road or that airport runway, you're inviting people to burn carbon to use that infrastructure. Think there's a kind of a turn towards bringing the climate and environmental impact angle to lots more things, such as sport. There was a recent article in the Irish Times by Dennis Walsh about how climate change is really affecting sport. And I think Taylor Swift had to stop one of her concerts in Brazil recently because it was too hot and the fans were fainting and so on. So climate change is affecting things that we don't normally think of as climate change related stories. So I think sport is a really good one. Some stuff about the climate impact of, say, hosting the Olympics or having a big sporting event or a festival. What's the environmental impact of that, and how can it be done more sustainably? Let me see. I'm kind of running out of time a little bit. I just did want to talk about to be aware of climate change disinformation, you know, to be able to spot certain narratives and discourses that people put forward that are really not, they're about delaying climate action. So in my slides, which I'm going to share with you guys, or Claire will share with you, there's some information about climate change disinformation on social media. It's just something that you need to be aware of, that there are these discourses out there on social media and on other platforms that either deny the reality of climate change or try and discredit climate science and climate scientists, and oppose any policy that might do anything to reduce emissions. And this is a guide to some of those, and I don't really have time to go through them today. I want to just finish up then with this idea about solutions journalism that I mentioned earlier on, about a lot of what we see in the media is very disaster-led and very negative. And what's missing from a lot of coverage is, you know, we kind of know what we're running away from, what's behind us, you know, the wildfires and the floods and the droughts and sea level rise, you know, but we don't really have a huge idea about what we're running towards, what a post-transition society might look like, and how it might work and how we might feel living in something like that. So we don't have a very positive vision. It chimes into these debates about which is the better motivator, fear or hope. And we've been hammering the fear kind of aspect for a long time. And some of the research I'm seeing in climate change communications research says it's time to have a more to foreground or emphasize more what we're running towards and what a post-transition would look like. So I'm going to leave it there. There's some more detail in my slides about solutions journalism and some resources in the kind of speaker notes under each slide, some links and so on that I hope you'll find useful. So I'm just going to stop sharing my slide, and maybe we've a couple of minutes to take some questions.
We don't currently have any questions in, so pop your questions in. But as you were saying there about sport, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Premier League this weekend had their first green football weekend, where they challenged all the fans and all the teams to, you know, have climate actions like vegan food for the fans on the day, and look at how they traveled. So yeah, that whole idea of sport and the different type of things that we don't normally associate with environmental journalism, it's certainly coming to the foreground in a very prominent way. Like Sky is behind that whole green football weekend. So interesting to see that kind of thing come to the foreground. We have a hand up, so I'm going to allow this person to talk so they can ask a question. Caroline, you can just unmute and then you should be able to ask your question. Is that a facility we have? It should be, no? You can always type it into the Q&A or into the chat either if you can't. Oh yeah, there we go.
Just while we're waiting for her to connect there, I posted in a link that we did have one submission last year on climate change and motorsport as well. So you can have a look at that from Dunboyne College for further education.
Yeah. I mean, just Rob, on your point, I don't know, some of the attendees might be aware of Forest Green Rovers, who are kind of the leading this thing. They're owned by a guy called Dale Vince, I think, who's really championed being sustainable. Their stands are made out of wood. They recycle everything. There's vegan food. In fact, I think some of the visiting teams have this chant about no meat in the pies or something, some slag on them. but they recycle it. They use the water from the urinals and everything. So yeah, it is. I think it is a growing focus. One thing that sort of strikes me is that I'm a rugby fan. So there was a league that had teams from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Italy, and somebody then decided it'd be a good idea to bring South African teams into it.
Yeah.
So without really thinking what the the emissions impact of flying teams up and down to South Africa and fans and all that, a few times a year. So it isn't, it's getting there, but it's certainly not there yet.
Yeah.
Couple of questions there in the Q&A. One is probably more for Claire. If you can see that, Dave, would it be okay to reference modern day media? Which I'd imagine includes sort of social media and so on.
I'm not quite sure what the person means by reference. It's certainly, like, when we're looking at what's out there in terms of how the media covers climate change, in a way, some of the platforms are a bit of a black box. I in my slide there there is a lot of climate change content on TikTok, for instance, and on YouTube. But there's not a whole lot of research that examines how is it being portrayed, how's it being framed. Some research about climate denial on those platforms, especially YouTube and TikTok. It's on Twitter or X. Climate denial has come roaring back since Elon Musk took over. It's just grown exponentially. So it's certainly a good idea to modern day media. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's okay to reference it. I think if you were able to do a TikTok video or a series of TikTok videos as your project, I think it would be fantastic, because that's where a lot of people are getting their information, and it's great to put kind of positive information, accurate information into these information kind of systems.
Yeah, and of course, this is just one of the mediums that we offer for you to enter in. You can enter video, you can enter photography as well. So, I mean, it's a multidisciplinary kind of program. So, while we're talking about the written word today, we will be doing these webinars again for the video and for photography. And Claire might elaborate on when they're again.
Yeah, we'll have the timeline for them in March, photography and videography in April. And I know there's a question in there from Mark on the video. The limit is 3 minutes. I think they say like a page of an article would translate to 60 to 90 seconds on screen. For the article, the word count is about 1,000. Your title will be about 140. And then your caption maybe say 20 words. Or if you're doing the photo campaign, it would be about 100-word description. But for today's, our focus on the articles will be about 1,000 words. And if you're looking to submit your YouTube video link, you can email that to the YRE, or you can email me and I can discuss the various options that you can send that in to me as well. But we will be focusing on that on the 9th of April on the videography skills then as well.
Yeah, could I just add that Philip Bromwell, I know I teach a bit of iPhone videography here in DCU. Philip Bromwell is fantastic.
And recording from last year up, Mark, if you want to have a look, I'll send you the link to our YouTube channel and you can look at some of our past webinars on videography too, if you're looking to get started before April. And just to summarize as well, that the 3 categories are 11 to 14 years, 15 to 18 years, and then 19 to 25 years. 3 different categories for age. Put a link into our criteria as well on our YRE Ireland topic. Any other questions for Dave there?
I have a quick question, Dave, if you don't mind. you know, just from your experience, do you think getting involved in projects like this is useful for a future career in environmental journalism? You know, if you have these sort of efforts made, you know, does it look quite solid and good in terms of kind of accessing future career opportunities?
Yeah, I think, well, with the caveat that the media sector is under pressure at the moment. But I think there was a report out recently by the Neiman Labs who said that everybody is going to be a climate reporter kind of sooner or later, because it's going to be affecting every aspect of reporting, business reporting, politics, lifestyle, fashion, everything will kind of have a climate angle. So I think it is a really good kind of thing to focus on if you're thinking about a career in journalism or in the media, to have that expertise, that baseline kind of knowledge, that some reporters, we're doing some training with newsrooms at the moment, to try and get them to a level that a lot of you guys here on the webinar would already be at. So I think it's a really good focus to specialize in if you're thinking of becoming a reporter or going into journalism.
Thanks.
Yeah, see, we're coming up to 2 o'clock, so we might wrap up there, and you can feel free to submit any questions after the webinar, and we can send on the slides from today as well. But I want to say a huge thank you to Dave. Just really encapsulated the whole journalistic process for article writing there, and just from generating ideas and where to source from academia as well, and where to find your useful resources, and just some other idea. Like, I really liked the use of anecdotal headlines as well, and the post transition and the implications of not acting, and some really, really good ideas there as well, and starting with the middle as well, backfilling details on climate change impacts. Then it's like really, really, really useful, and I know that everyone has found today really valuable. So thanks to everyone as well for giving up your lunchtime today. And yeah, thanks everyone. Submit any questions after this webinar. I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, let's stop recording here now.